Welcome to Your Mythology Book Club. I'm Daniel, and I'm a Greek mythology enthusiast. In this series, we're covering the Iliad, and in this episode, we'll tackle books 12 and 13. Like the last episode, I'm going to break this one into two parts. But last time, it was only after I'd recorded just over 2 hours of content that I realized I needed to split the episode. This time, I'm planning for it. This has all been a learning process for me, and I appreciate your sticking with me. I feel I am improving as I go. Okay, here we are, book 12. That's halfway through. Where we left off at the end of book 11, we'd been following Patroclus, who'd been spending all the time since Achilles' falling out with Agamemnon. Remember, that was early on in the Iliad. Patroclus has been spending all of his time with Achilles in their camp. But in book 11, Achilles has become curious about what Greek it was he saw being brought wounded into camp, and he sent Patroclus out to investigate. As Patroclus went out and witnessed scenes of suffering among the Greeks, he could no longer keep his eyes closed. We left Patroclus after he had helped treat a wounded friend, and he was finally going back to report to Achilles. And we'll have to leave Patroclus and Achilles alone for a bit longer. In books 12 and 13, we're going to be covering some heavy fighting as the Trojans now have the Greek camp surrounded and are threatening its defenses. And let's talk a little bit about the layout of the Greek camp, because we're going to be spending a lot of time in the camp in books 12 and 13. We'll have a lot of action happening at multiple places in the camp, so you'll want to build a clear image of it in your mind. Now, remember, the Greeks are an invading force here. They have their ships pulled up on the beach, and these ships mean everything to them. They're vitally important for them to maintain, because without the ships, the Greeks are trapped in hostile country. So they've built defenses around the ships. They dug a deep ditch and filled it with spikes. And then inside the ditch, they built a wall with lookout towers and strong barred gates. There are two main ways that you can conceptualize the layout of the Greek camp, however. One is the spit of land version. The other is the regular beach version. Each is valid. I'll explain a little bit more what I mean by each of these. And previously, I've linked to a map that depicts the Greek camp as being on a spit of land, connected to the mainland only at a narrow point at its southern end. You'll find this map linked again in this episode's show notes. It's hosted on the University of Delaware website. And I like the spit of land conception of the camp because it makes how fast the wall was built make sense. Remember, the Greeks put it up in one night. If the wall only had to be built across a narrow spit of land, then certainly building a wall in one night could make sense in that version. But I also like the spit of land way to visualize the camp because it fits in with what we've learned about the actual geography of Troy and its surroundings. In ancient times, it seems that there actually was a spit of land with the Aegean Sea on one side and a bay on the other. The city of Troy rose on a rocky hilltop on the opposite side of that bay, and that's a good place for a city in a protected bay with easy access to the important Dardanelles Straits, also known as the Hellespont, which separates Asia from Europe. And since ancient times, the river which emptied into that bay, known then as the Scamander or Scamandros, that river has since silted up that bay, and the bay just doesn't exist anymore. So there is no more spit of land. So I feel that there's a lot to be said for the spit of land conception of the camp, but the more traditional way of viewing the Greek camp looks at the geography as it exists now, and probably has been for many centuries now, which is where there is no spit of land, and that the Greek camp was built along a traditional beach. The ships were simply pulled up along a stretch of beach. Of course, that means that their defensive ditch and their wall would have to go clear around that entire section of beach, from one point of the beach where their camp and pulled up ships starts, curving around the entire beach to the far end of their camp. This would require a lot more effort, and it would be a lot more wall to defend. But this is also a perfectly valid way of envisioning the camp. For this episode, I've linked to a second map as well, which depicts this version, the traditional beach version. Look in the links for Jenny Strauss Clay's Homer's Trojan Theater. And this website is actually a really great resource, and I happen to come across it at just the right time, because in addition to providing some great maps for envisioning the action, it actually has step-by-step layouts, positionings for characters for some of the upcoming heavy battle books, including 12 and 13, with specific lines from the Iliad cited and numerous maps to show where various characters are at different points in the story. So if you're having any difficulty at all following the action, please check out this website. So with all this being said, let's get into Book 12 and the very serious threat that the Trojans now pose to the surrounded Greeks. Still, they fought confusedly, the Argives and the Trojans, nor were the fosse of the Danaans and their wide wall above long to protect them. The wall they had builded for defense of the ships, and the fosse they had drawn round about. For neither had they given goodly hecatombs to the gods, that it might guard with its bounds their swift ships and rich spoil. While Patroclus is in the camp tending to the wounded, that remnant of the Greek army still on its feet are fighting before the wall. But the narrator reminds us that the wall cannot long stand because it was built without proper sacrifice to the gods. This is a foreshadowing of what is to come for the wall. And another way in which the beginning and ends of Book 12 are mirrors of one another is how we will begin and end by following Hector. But before we get to Hector, the narrator describes the future destruction of the wall. First, when it will happen, which is in the 10th year of the war. And keep in mind that we are in the 9th year right now. And then it describes how the wall will be destroyed, which is through the combined efforts of Apollo, Poseidon, and Zeus. Poseidon and Apollo are involved. It's they who were primarily offended by the building of the Greek wall. Now, ostensibly, all the gods are offended by the building of anything without due religious observances and sacrifices beforehand, but these two gods, Poseidon and Apollo, had the particular interest in seeing the Greek wall fall because it was they who actually built the opposing Trojan wall. Now, what I wanted to find out when I did some more digging was that Apollo had been sentenced to build the walls of Troy as punishment for his prior killing of the Cyclopses, which he'd done in revenge for Zeus having killed his son Asclepios. But that's just not what I'm finding. Apollodorus, he's one of the mythographers from ancient times, has Apollo and Poseidon building the walls of Troy simply because these two gods randomly decided to test how insolent the previous Trojan king Laomedon was. While Ovid doesn't say why Apollo was involved in the building of the Trojan walls, only that he used his musical playing to do the actual work. Finally, when it comes to the future destruction of the wooden wall around the Greek camp, Zeus is involved because he acquiesced to Poseidon's request that that wall be destroyed, which is going to be done through a torrential rain caused by Zeus, the bringing together of all the rivers of the area against the wall by Apollo, and earthquakes caused by Poseidon. But this is all later, after Troy falls. For now, the wall stands, and the remaining Greeks are holed up behind it, or up on its towers, raining arrows and rocks down on the attacking Trojans. So now we find Hector attacking these defensive walls of the Greeks. He's compared to a wild boar or lion, penned in by a line of hunters and their dogs. He's always testing their defenses, looking for a weak spot to break through. Yet, while the wall is rattling with the many missiles hitting it, the ditch, dug deep and planted with numerous sharp stakes, is keeping the Trojans and their horses from advancing. The horses are terrified and won't even attempt to jump it, nor would that be wise. They would hit the wall and fall into the ditch of sharp spikes. So, Polydamas has a suggestion for Hector. He says, "Hector, and ye others of the Trojans and allies, foolishly do we drive our fleet horses through the dike. Nay, right hard it is to cross, for sharp stakes stand at it, and over against them the wall of the Achaeans. Thereby none may go down and fight in chariots, for strait is the place wherein, methinks, we might come by a mischief. For if Zeus that thunders on high is utterly to destroy them in his evil will, and is minded to help the Trojans, Verily then I too would desire that even instantly this might be, that the Achaeans should perish here, nameless, far from Argos. And if they turn again, and we flee back from among the ships, and rush into the delved ditch, then methinks that not even one from among us to bear the tidings will win back to the city before the force of the Achaeans when they rally. But come as I declare, let us all obey. Let our squires hold the horses by the dike, while we, being harnessed in our gear as foot soldiers, follow all together with Hector, and the Achaeans will not withstand us, if indeed the bands of death be made fast upon them. So Polydamas is suggesting to Hector that they shouldn't even try to attack the defenses using their horses. That's proven useless, and he's afraid that they would get tangled up in the forest of stakes in the ditch anyway, and they'd be easily picked off and all be killed. So he suggests that they have the lower-ranked men keep their horses back, while the best warriors all advance on foot behind Hector. And Hector follows this advice of Polydamas and dismounts from his chariot. The other Trojan leaders follow suit and form into 5 companies to advance on foot against the Greek defenses. The first of the 5 companies is led by Hector, with Polydamas and Cebriones. The second is led by Paris and includes Alcathoos and Agenor. The third is led jointly by Helenos and Deiphobos, 2 other sons of Priam, and includes Asios. The fourth is led by Aeneas and includes Acamas and Archilochos, brothers of each other and relatives of Aeneas. And the fifth group, composed of allies, not Trojans, is led by Sarpedon and includes Glaucus and Asteropaeus. The Trojans and their allies advance now toward the Greek defenses, protecting each other with their shields raised, all except Asios of the third company, who refused to leave his horses behind in the care of the lower ranks as they'd planned. Then the rest of the Trojans and the far-famed allies obeyed the counsel of blameless Polydamas, but Asios, Hyrtacos, leader of men, willed not to leave his horses there, and his squire the charioteer, but with them he drew near the swift ships, fond man, for never was he avoiding evil fates to return, rejoicing in his horses and chariots, back from the ships to windy Ilios. Nay, ere that the fate of ill name overshadowed him, by the spear of Idomeneus, the haughty son of Deucalion. For Asios went against the left flank of the ships, whereby the Achaeans returned out of the plain with chariots and horses. There he drave through his horses and his car, nor found he the doors shut on the gates and the long bar, but men were holding them open, if perchance they might save any of their comrades fleeing out of the battle towards the ships. Straight thereby he held his horses with unswerving aim, and his men followed him, crying shrilly, for they deemed that the Achaeans could no longer hold them off, but that themselves would fall on the black ships. Fools! For in the gates they found 2 men of the bravest, the high-hearted sons of the warrior Lapithae, one the son of Perithous, Polypoetes, and one Leonteus, peer of Ares, the bane of men. These twain stood in front of the lofty gates, like high-crested oak trees in the hills, that forever abide the wind and rain, firm fixed with roots great and long. Even so these twain, trusting to the mightiness of their hands, abode the coming of great Asios, and fled not. So Asios, he's kind of full of himself, and he doesn't listen. He drives his chariot at the gate on the left side of the wall, which the Greeks were leaving open for any Greeks still straggling in, returning from the field, so they'd be able to get rescued. So that gate is open, but it's not unguarded. And here, Asios is confronted by 2 Lapiths, Polypoetes and Leonteus, standing like oak trees in the gateway. You can envision that. So the Lapiths are a pretty much legendary tribe. They don't bleed into real history the way most of these other groups will. Like when we hear about Locrians and Athenians and Spartans, these are all real people from real places, unlike the Lapiths. Anyway, back to Asios, who thought he would be able to just charge through, but it was not going to be so easy. The 2 Lapiths advance through the gate to meet the charging chariot of Asios, who is followed by several of his men as well, Iamenos, Adamas son of Asios, Orestes, Thoon, and Onomeos. Seeing Asios and his men coming at the open gate, Polypoetes and Leontius, the two Lapis, they come out to play. But when they saw the Trojans assailing the wall, while the Danaans cried and turned in flight, then forth rushed the twain, and fought in front of the gates like wild boars, that in the mountains abide the assailing crew of men and dogs. And charging on either flank, they crush the wood around them, cutting it at the root, and the clatter of their tusks waxes loud, till one smite them and take their life away. So clattered the bright bronze on the breasts of the twain, as they were smitten in close fight. For right hardily they fought, trusting to the host above them, and to their own strength. For the men above were casting with stones from the well-builded towers in defense of themselves and of the huts, and of the swift-faring ships. And like snowflakes the stones fell earthward, flakes that a tempestuous wind, as it driveth the dark clouds, rains thickly down on the bounteous earth. So thick fell the missiles from the hands of the Achaeans and Trojans alike, and their helms rang harsh, and their bossy shields, being smitten with mighty stones. As the two Lapiths are attacking Asios and his men before the gate, the Greeks up on top of the wall are throwing down large stones upon the Trojans. It's like a snowfall of stones, and the sound of rocks clanging on metal shields and armor, and the crash of sword upon sword. Asios cries aloud to Zeus, "Father Zeus, verily thou too dost greatly love a lie. For I deemed not that the Achaean heroes could withstand our might and our hands invincible. But they, like wasps of nimble body, or bees that have made their dwellings in a rugged path, and leave not their hollow hold, but abide and keep the hunters at bay for the sake of their little ones. Even so, these brave men have no will to give ground from the gates, though they are but two, ere they slay or be slain." So, Zeus's mind has remained unchanged, because he wants to save the glory for Hector. He's not going to answer Asios' prayer. Also, he's not going to answer Asios' prayer because Asios is kind of an ass. First, he disobeys orders and charges ahead of the other Trojans on horseback instead of on foot like they had agreed. And now he's calling Zeus a liar for his own, Asios' own, misperception of the Greek defensive situation. I'm not going to miss Asios when he's gone. He's the kind of guy who makes it easy to say goodbye. At line 176, the narrator refers to himself here, a kind of an interesting moment, and implies that only a god could tell the whole tale of everything going on in the battle. And this is not in the abridged version, but Green writes, "And hard it would be for me, like a god, to tell the whole tale." This is a good way of giving an impression that there's a lot of action going on all along the wall, not just this one thing with Asios and the Lapiths. The narrator goes on to say that the Greeks are feeling disheartened at this point, and the gods that support the Greeks are equally down in spirit. But the fighting has to continue despite the dire situation. Polypoetes kills Damasos with a spear through the head. Then he kills Pylon and Ormenos. Leontius spears Hippomachos to death, then switches to his sword and kills Antiphantes, Menon, Orestes, and Iamenos. The Lapiths now pause to loot all these corpses, which they are free to do, because the largest group of Trojans, that led by Hector, still hasn't crossed the ditch and entered the battle. Their hesitation came from having witnessed a sign, a bad omen from Zeus. The Trojans had seen an eagle, that's the bird of Zeus, flying on their left. That's not good. But it gets worse. The eagle was carrying a snake in its talons. The snake is huge, and it's blood red, and it's still alive, and it's still struggling against its captor being carried in the sky. Then the Trojans, because it's not over yet, then the Trojans saw that snake attack the eagle. It bites the eagle in the breast near the neck, and the eagle screams and drops the snake right in the midst of Hector's company, and it flies off. Now, I don't think that you have to be an expert in ornithomancy to read this sign. This is a pretty clear sign to the Trojans that things aren't going to go so well for them. So, after having witnessed this remarkable sign, Polydamas suggests to Hector that they obey the clear meaning of this sign from Zeus. He says, Hector, ever dost thou rebuke me in the assemblies, though I counsel wisely, since it by no means beseemeth one of the people to speak contrary to thee in a council or in war, but always to increase thy power. But now again will I say all that seemeth to me to be best. Let us not advance and fight with the Danaans for the ships. For even thus, methinks, the end will be. If indeed this bird hath come for the Trojans when they were eager to cross the dike, this eagle of lofty flight, skirting the host on the left hand, bearing in its talons a blood-red monstrous snake, yet living, then straightway left he hold of him, before he reached his own nest, nor brought him home in the end to give to his nestlings. Even so shall we, though we burst with mighty force the gates and wall of the Achaeans, and the Achaeans give ground, even so we shall return in disarray from the ships by the way we came. For many of the Trojans shall we leave behind, whom the Achaeans will slay with the sword in defense of the ships. Even so would a soothsayer interpret that in his heart had clear knowledge of omens, and whom the people obeyed. That's exactly what I think, Polydamas. You Trojans should obey the eagle sign. But Hector is not having it. He's kind of like me in this way. Once he has a plan in mind, it's hard for him to slow that momentum and change gears. He responds, Polydamas, that thou speakest is no longer pleasing to me. Yea, thou knowest how to conceive another better than this. But if thou verily speakest thus in earnest, then the gods themselves have utterly destroyed thy wits, thou that bidst us forget the counsels of loud thundering Zeus, that himself promised me, and confirmed with a nod of his head. But thou bidst us be obedient to birds long of wing, whereto I give no heed, nor take any care thereof, whether they fare to the right, to the dawn, or to the sun, or to the left, to mist, or to darkness. Nay, for us, let us trust to the counsel of mighty Zeus, who is king over all mortals and immortals. One omen is best, to fight for our own country. And wherefore dost thou fear war and battle? For if all the rest of us be slain by the ships of the Argives, yet needest thou not to fear to perish, for thy heart is not warlike, nor enduring in battle. But if thou dost hold aloof from the fight, or winnest any other with thy words to turn from the war, straightway by my spear shalt thou be smitten and lose thy life. Hector totally refutes Polydamas' suggestion that they delay the attack in light of the eagle and snake omen. And first he says what Polydamas says doesn't please him, and that Polydamas is capable of saying better things than what he said, which is kind of a cute and weird opening argument. He reminds Polydamas that Zeus told him through his divine messenger goddess, Iris, that he would now be victorious, although I think what she said was that Hector would be granted the power to push the Greeks back to their ships, not to invade, much less to destroy their camp. So he's actually reading more into what Zeus said than Zeus actually said. But Hector then goes on to say how he doesn't pay any attention to the flights of birds, which, fair enough. I mean, most people back then did, and it was at the time a very common way of looking at the world. But, you know, that's, I get not looking at birds. I don't look at birds. But my favorite argument of his is when he simply says that the best omen is to just fight for your country. Hector then insinuates that Polydamas is a coward and ends with the threat that if Polydamas convinces anyone else to abandon the attack, Hector's just going to kill him. So Hector now leads the attack, and his men follow, shouting their battle cries. And Zeus, that joyeth in the thunder, roused from the hills of Ida a blast of wind, which bare the dust straight against the ships. And he made weak the heart of the Achaeans, but gave renown to the Trojans and to Hector. The Trojans are now attempting to physically tear down the Greek wall, pulling out the timber and the stones. But the Greeks don't give way. They stuff any opening with their shields, and they're continuing to rain down rocks on the Trojans. The two Aiases now are going back and forth, giving encouragement to the Greeks. O friends, whosoever is eminent, or whosoever is of middle station among the Argives, or lower yet, for in no wise are all men equal in war. Now there is work for all, and this yourselves well know. Let none turn back to the ships, for that he hath heard one threatening aloud. Nay, get ye forward, and cheer another on, if perchance Olympian Zeus, the lord of lightning, will grant us to drive back the assault and push the foe to the city. It's not clear which of the two Aiases says this, but it gives us hope that this isn't the end for the Greeks. Now, again, for the second time this book, the stones being thrown down by both sides are compared to the snowfalls of Zeus covering the landscape. I have to imagine that throwing stones was among the first weapons of war, right? Probably going back into the dim recesses of prehistory. But it's interesting to note how prominent it still was, stone throwing, even at this point, which is at the height of the Bronze Age. Yet never would the Trojans then, and renowned Hector, have broken the gates of the wall and the long bar, if Zeus the counselor had not roused his son Sarpedon against the Argives, like a lion against the kine of crooked horn. So did his heart urge on the godlike Sarpedon to rush against the wall and break through the battlements. It's only Zeus rousing up a fighting spirit in his own son Sarpedon that allows the Trojans to advance. Otherwise, the narrator assures us, the Greek defenses would have held. And this character, Sarpedon, a mortal son of Zeus, will become involved in an interesting point regarding the matter of fate, which is very important in ancient Greek thought. Fate. And who is subject to it? Just mortals? Are the gods also subject to fate? It will come to pass that even Zeus is subject to fate, as we'll see. And yet fate was conceptualized as not being something outside or above the divine order, but rather fate was conceptualized as a group of three goddesses, the Moirai. Now, Sarpedon himself is a very interesting character. His parentage varies a lot in the different ancient writers. Some have him as a son of Europa, for whom Europe is named, as you might guess, and brother of King Minos of Crete, the king of the grand palace of Knossos and its labyrinth patrolled by the Minotaur. And this is a colorful story, but it introduces a problem into the timeline, since that would place Sarpedon a few generations before the time of the Iliad. Homer avoids that timeline problem by having Sarpedon's mother be Laodamia, daughter of Bellerophon. That's the hero who defeated the bizarre and terrifying Chimera, and Bellerophon who rode the flying horse Pegasus. So in either case, whichever his parentage is, it's important to note that despite being a son of Zeus, Sarpedon is not immortal. And I'll just say that there don't seem to be any hard and fast rules in ancient Greek mythology about which children of divine parents get to be immortal. A number of the heroes in the Iliad are children of mixed parentage, one parent with one parent divine and one parent not divine. Achilles and Aeneas are two examples that spring to mind. Heracles and Asclepios were both mortal sons of divine fathers, but were later made into gods. And Dionysus, son of Zeus and the mortal woman Semele, was a god at birth, and actually later raised his mortal mother to godhood. So the rules are not consistent. And this can be annoying to us who are used to clear canonical thinking in our fictional worlds. I grew up reading authors like Tolkien, whose fictional world was especially well thought out and consistent. But we have to keep in mind that these myths were written by various peoples over a long period of time, and that they were wrapped up in lots of different religious and cultural implications. So we're not going to find consistency. This has been a long way of saying that Sarpedon, he is not immortal. And we'll get to that point shortly, because as you can guess from all the time I'm spending on this, Sarpedon, yeah, he's going to end up dying. So, Sarpedon's shield is now described. It's of hammered bronze and ox hides and golden hasps, and he carries 2 spears. He's described as a lion of the mountains, not a mountain lion. That's native to North America. In ancient times, Europe and the Near East had lions. And it seems that the lions of that region were the same species of lions that still live in Africa. Lions may have lived in some parts of northern Greece until about the 300s. And I've seen references in ancient literature to European lions having black manes, and this may well have been the case, as some lions in Africa today display that trait. Per discovery.uk.com, black-maned lions are associated with higher testosterone levels. So it might not be too much of a stretch to think that European lions were particularly aggressive if they often had black manes. And I'll note that the presence of lions in Europe in historical times helps explain why lions are so prominent in European heraldry despite not living in Europe right now. Anyways, this fighting spirit that his father Zeus has kindled in him makes Sarpedon, like a hungry lion, come down from the mountains to attack the flock of herdsmen in the settled lands, one whose hunger is driving him to attack and not to return to the mountains until he's taken his shot at the prey. Sarpedon calls out to his comrade Glaucus, "Glaucus, wherefore have we twain the chiefest honor, seats of honor and messes, and full cups in Lycia, and all men look on us as gods? And wherefore hold we a great demesne by the banks of Xanthos, a fair demesne of orchard lands, and wheat-bearing tilth? Therefore now it behoveth us to take our stand in the first rank of the Lycians, and encounter fiery battle, that certain of the well-corsleted Lycians may say, Verily, our kings that rule Lycia be no inglorious men, they that eat fat sheep, and drink the choice wine honey sweet. Nay, but they are also of excellent might, for they war in the foremost ranks of the Lycians. Ah, friend, if once escaped from this battle, we were forever to be ageless and immortal. Neither would I fight myself in the foremost ranks, nor would I send thee into the war that giveth men renown. But now, for, assuredly, 10,000 fates of death do every way beset us, and these no mortal man may escape nor avoid. Now let us go forward, whether we shall give glory to other men, or others to us." Glaucus obeys Sarpedon's call for them to attack, and moving forward into battle, the Greek Menestheus sees them coming and is fearful. Menestheus is the king of Athens, not a terribly important place in Greece at the time of the Iliad, despite its tremendous importance in later Greek history. Menestheus can see that Sarpedon and Glaucus are making for the defensive tower that he's manning. And he can see that the two Aiases and Teucros, or Teucer, you remember him, Aias the Greater's half-brother, he's a little guy, he shoots arrows from behind his big brother's shield. Menestheus is calling down to these three Greek heroes to come help him. He's so afraid. Guys, help me up here. Menestheus, not known for his courage. Ability to organize men in battle, that's his specialty. Not so much facing a charging, divinely inspired son of Zeus and his buddy. But over the deafening sounds of battle, the Aiases and Teucros, they can't hear Menestheus. So he turns to the herald, Thoötes, who's conveniently right next to him, and says, "Go, noble Thoötes, and run! And call Aias, or rather the twain, for that will be far the best of all, since quickly here there will be wrought utter ruin. For hereby press the leaders of the Lycians, who are of old fierce in strong battle. But if beside them too war and toil rise, yet at least let the strong Telamonian Aias come alone, and let Teucros, the skilled bowman, follow with him." So Menestheus is nervous, and he knows that by asking for Aias, he'll get at least two people to come to help him, because Telamonian Aias is always accompanied by Oilean Aias and or Teucros. Aias the Greater responds, speaking to Oilean Aias, "Aias, do ye twain stand here, thyself and strong Lycomedes, and urge the Danaans to war with all their might, but I go thither to take my part in battle, and quickly will I come again, when I have well aided them." So he's saying he'll go help Menestheus along with Teucros, and he instructs Aias the Lesser to remain there with Lycomedes to continue fighting in their current position. The tower manned by Menestheus is getting seriously attacked by the time Aias and Teucros arrive. The Trojans are swirling around the tower like a black tornado. The Trojans are now attempting to climb the wall. Aias kills a man named Epicles with one of those giant stones that men nowadays wouldn't be able to lift, and Epicles goes plummeting down like a diver into the sea. Teucros the archer takes aim and immediately hits Glaukos in the arm with an arrow. Glaukos tries to hide the fact that he's been hit, so none of the enemy Greeks will gloat over him. This is some schoolyard stuff here, worrying that the mean kids will make fun of you. Sarpedon noticed, however, and he's sad to see that Glaukos is now leaving the battle to nurse his wound. Despite being sad about Glaukos leaving the battle, though, Sarpedon continues the fight. He spears a man named Alcmaeon, who goes falling down with his armor rattling on him, that recurrent sonic image we get so often. Then Sarpedon seized, with strong hands, the battlement, and dragged, and it all gave way together, while above the wall was stripped bare and a path made for many. So Sarpedon just tears a hole through the wall with his bare hands, Hulk style. Now there's an opening in the wall for the Trojan army to advance through. Sarpedon is the first to charge into the breach in the wall. Aias and Teucros now gang up on Sarpedon. Teucros strikes first with an arrow to the abdomen, but it's deflected by Sarpedon's metal belt. Now Aias attacks, thrusting his spear directly at Sarpedon. Sarpedon raises his shield and wards off the attack, but this has stopped Sarpedon's charge cold. Sarpedon now backs off a bit and calls out to his men, the Trojan ally group from Lycia who are nearby, "Lycians, wherefore thus are ye slack in impetuous valor? Hard it is for me, stalwart as I am, alone to break through and make a path to the ships. Nay, follow hard after me, for the more men the better work." The Lycians respond to their king's call and join Sarpedon at the breach in the wall. So now there's a stalemate at this point. The Lycians can't advance, but the Greeks can't push the Lycians back either, which is what they'd really like to do. They'd like to at least get some rocks and timber up in here to close this hole in their wall that Sarpedon tore. There's an amusing little comparison of the stalemate here, saying that the two sides are like neighboring property owners disputing over a boundary disagreement. A comparison that I suppose is surprisingly relatable, especially for a Bronze Age text, to anyone in the modern world who's had some similar backyard disagreement with their neighbors. The stalemate at the breach goes on for some time, with men on both sides fighting and dying here. But there is a reason for this stalemate at this point, where the Trojans are paused in their attempt to finally make their way into the Greek camp after 10 long years of siege. Zeus is waiting for his scales to be full. The narrator makes a comparison to a woman selling wool by the pound, placing wool into the scale until it balances, until the measure is full. But here on the battlefield, what's being measured isn't wool, it's human lives. And once the measure is full, once enough lives have been spent to make breaching the Greek camp sufficiently glorious, then the glory of this breach, it won't go to Sarpedon, despite the fact that we've been following his exploits for a little while now. It'll go to Hector. That's what Zeus has been waiting for. That's why he's orchestrated this stalemate here. And finally, the moment arrives. Hector calls out to the Trojans and their allies, "Rise, ye horse-taming Trojans! Break the wall of the Argives, and cast among the ships fierce, blazing fire!" Hector lifts up a stone, another one of those stones that you or I nor anyone else alive today could lift, and it's got a sharp, pointy end. He means to bash in the gate. Sarpedon's breach isn't where the advancement will happen. This is now all about Hector's glory. And he came, and he stood hard by, and firmly planted himself, and smote them in their midst, setting his legs well apart, that his cast might lack no strength. And he brake both the hinges, and the stone fell within by reason of its weight. And the gates rang aloud, and the bars held not, and the doors burst this way and that beneath the rush of the stone. Then glorious Hector leaped in, with face like the sudden night, shining and wondrous mail that was clad about his body, and with 2 spears in his hands. No man that met him could have held him back when once he leaped within the gates, none but the gods, and his eyes shone with fire. Turning towards the throng, he cried to the Trojans to overleap the wall, and they obeyed his summons, and speedily some overleaped the wall, and some poured into the fair-wrought gateways, and the Danaans fled in fear among the hollow ships, and a ceaseless clamor arose. Hector leaps through, his face like swift nightfall, shining terribly in his bronze. None could stop him. In this moment, no mortal man could stand against him, with the strength of Zeus in him now. This is a classic dramatic moment, a still shot. This could be one of the movie posters. Hector calls on the Trojans, who respond immediately, charging headlong through the gate. Scaling the walls, the defenses are abandoned, and the Greeks flee in panic to their ships. This is where Book 12 ends.